This is my shop vac cart, and it has a mini cyclone in the front. So the way this works, the air comes in through this tube and runs around this cyclone. As the air is going around in this vortex, the heavy dust falls down into this bucket. The light dust or invisible dust and air is sucked up this tube through these tubings and into the vacuum cleaner. So what happens is about 98% of all of the dust falls into the bucket. Only a small amount of dust will make its way into the vacuum cleaner. When I say a small amount of dust, what that means is that of the visible dust, only a small amount will make it into the vacuum cleaner, which means that the filter in the vacuum cleaner back here will remain clearer for longer and be more effective at filtering out the invisible dust, the harmful dust, the smaller particles. So it's much better for your health. Also, it's much easier to simply fill up this bucket and then you just simply empty this bucket. Yeah. And these plastic cyclones are quite cheap to buy. The trick is that you've got to create your own little connections for everything, and I put it into this cart which is on casters so I can easily move it around. I also, when I purchased the cyclone, I purchased a length of 50mm hose, but you don't need to do that. That was just what I did. There's some advantages and disadvantages with that. Because the vacuum cleaner is a high pressure system, you don't really need to have a wide hose. However, with the 50mm hose, one advantage of that is it's less likely to get clogged with the larger dust particles. So that's why I went that way. Plus, by buying this hose alongside with the cyclone, I got it cheaper. But you could just use the, I think it's 38mm hose that comes with most vacuum cleaners. You're going to need to have a jigsaw. And if you can't afford a jigsaw, you can just get a coping saw and do it by hand. You don't need to do a lot of curved work, so either is quite practical for this. You'll need to have a circular saw to cut out, if you want to make the cart at least, you'll need the circular saw if you want to do the same as me, so that you can cut these sheets, or you could simply just use a hand saw if you haven't got a circular saw. It's not a huge amount of cutting, but hopefully you've got a circular saw, you can do that. You'll need to have a drill. Again, it doesn't need to be a cordless one, but if you've got one that can also be a drill driver as well, that would be advantageous. So you'll need a drill. You'll need to have a hacksaw. That's to cut the tubing, or if you've got a miter saw like I have, I just cut it on the miter saw, just a piece of cake and comes out nice and square. But a hacksaw is fine as well. It's only to cut the plastic, so that's pretty simple. To join the plastic parts, as I'll explain later, you'll need to have some PVC cement for pressure pipes, which is a kind of glue specifically for joining the pipe work. So I'll explain that later. Why the pipe work is useful. If you're going to make the cart, you'll need, if you're going to make the same as me, you might have a different design, but I used 12mm plywood, and I used some, I think it's 30 by 65mm dressed timber for a bit of framing to use strength. I tried to keep it light, so this is only 12mm ply, and I tried to keep the amount of woodwork down so it would be fairly light and not sort of over-engineered. That's about it. You're going to need to have various fittings, and this is actually the tricky part, so I'll explain that later. Yeah, but you'll need to come up with various fittings. And you might come up, if you did some more research, you might come up with a better design than I had. I was in a little bit of a hurry, so I just grabbed what I could get my hands on in terms of a solution to connect the cyclone down here the Cyclone to the vacuum cleaner. In hindsight, I didn't need such a big vacuum cleaner. The motor, the power of the motor is important, but the size of the bucket is not so important, because the container, the bucket of the vacuum cleaner is not so important, because of course most of the material is going to be captured in your bucket. You'll need to buy a bucket, of course. The bucket, now I just grabbed a 20-litre bucket that was in a big box store that looked fairly strong, but it's actually not strong enough, and I'll explain how I solved that. If you can find a metal bucket, or perhaps a plastic bucket that's ribbed, that's stronger, that would be better. Or if you're just going to do the same as me and grab some 20-litre bucket somewhere, I'll explain how I strengthened that up to solve that. There's a couple of things I did to resolve that. I'll also had some I had to strengthen the lid as well. So there's a few other little bits and pieces, obviously some screws and glue, etc. for the cart. Yeah, but that's probably most of the things. For my cart, I built a floor essentially, so that's strong enough to hold the casters. If you can see down there, I've got some small casters that are lockable. Work very well. So I built a floor and sides, and obviously some frame to hold the sides together. And then at the top I built a sort of a little bit of a bin, and up here I've got all of my sandpaper, and then in here I've got a larger cavity here. I normally just throw the sander in there and anything else that I happen to be using, paintbrushes or whatever, dust masks or whatever that I happen to be using, power cords, so I can just throw that on top.